hello, Mexico. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really flattered and honored to be invited here. It's my first time in Puebla. It's lovely. And I've come here today to share my work with all of you. And for those of you who haven't seen it, this will be a first glimpse into what I do. And if I could put it in a nutshell, what I do is really look at familiar objects in the world around us in different ways. So I'm going to show you a couple of the things that I've made and give you a little background on how each idea came about. So my story really begins way back when I was a baby. And this is really about this chair, this shot. My parents had a living room that we were not allowed to enter as children. And in this living room, they had these two gold chairs that we weren't allowed to sit on, except on holidays, when my family would take out the camera and we would sit on the chairs and we would take pictures on them. So these two chairs grew older and older, and they never got any action whatsoever. Cut forward to about 25 years later, when my parents moved and I was living in New York City after college. And my parents called me up one day and said, "We're moving. We thought you might like to have the gold chairs from the living room." And I said, "What? For 25 years we couldn't sit on them and now you just want to give them to me?" Okay, I'll take them. I was desperate. I needed free furniture. I put them in my apartment. And I remember one of the first nights I was there, I was sitting at looking at these perfect gold chairs from the 60s. And thinking to myself, what would this chair want to do more than anything else in the world after being locked in that living room for 25 years? And I made a film about that idea. And here it is. Thank you. Thanks. So that's roof sex. Just so you know, every chair that you ever see from now on is either a male or a female. You just have to decide it when you see it. Actually, there's probably more. So moving on, I was still in New York City, and I moved to a big apartment in Harlem. And the night that I had a big party to celebrate moving into my new house. And during the party, we had an electrical fire in the house, and all the sockets in the wall started smoking, and lights were burning out, and the microwave broke, and the stereo started playing. It was a very strange surge of power that I experienced. And afterwards, I realized that we had lost a lot of equipment. And I was thinking to myself, what can I do with all this stuff? What can I make? What kind of good could I bring out of all this destruction, so to speak? And I started ripping the circuit boards out of the insides of all this dead equipment. And the first thing that I noticed was that it looked like the Earth, really, a city from an aerial perspective. So that was the beginning of this idea. And I thought, oh, wow, I've got this little city grid. And I started to build it. And I started, like, stealing my girlfriend at the times, like, you could see stealing her perfume from around the house and starting to build this little city on a table. And I had no idea what I wanted to do with this thing. I just liked it as a, as a little project of my own. You can see I just started, adding to it here or there and photographing it. And I was really just basically, falling in love with this thing, and I didn't know what to do with it. And for 6 months, it just started to collect dust, and it was just sitting in a corner. So you can see here, there's all different types of things in here. There's harmonicas and pepper shakers and all different pieces of just found objects from around the house. And I realized that, what do I do with this thing? It started to become just a monster in the corner. And I had an idea that, well, wait, if I'm just going to throw it out, why don't I destroy it in a spectacular way? Why don't I stage an air raid on this miniature city that I've built? And that was the idea for my next film, Kaboom, which I'm going to play for you now. Thanks. So this was the first time that I really started to think about objects in a different way. And I started using these festive objects like clown head cupcake toppers from the 70s, 60s, and 70s. Christmas ornaments. And gift bows, which I realized actually looked remarkably like World War II explosions from above. So this is the first time I started to play with these multiple associations. It's, on the one hand, it's about war and a kind of devastating thing. On the other hand, it's an object that we normally associate with celebration and gifting. So I was just exploring, different ways to play with objects. Here, for instance, I'm using popcorn as the flak around an airplane because popcorn itself is a food explosion, actually. Matchsticks as missiles also come with that association of striking and firing. So you can see objects tend to carry different levels of meaning with them that I imported into this idea of a miniature war. Here you can see popcorn. If you look closely, you can see the string that it's hanging off of. This is very lo-fi, just had an idea, just make it. Peanuts, very few people know that the actual atomic bomb was shaped like a peanut. It had 2 chambers of material that combined, blew up lots of stuff. The code name for the Manhattan Project was Circus Peanut. So there's levels of association there that I was playing with. Okay, moving on. I was thumbing around the internet and I came across this guy, Toru Iwatani, the creator of Pac-Man. And I was reading an interview with him. And he was talking about his idea, where he got the idea for the Pac-Man character. And even though Pac-Man does appear in nature, Toru said that he got the idea for Pac-Man from a pizza with a slice missing. And I thought at that moment, that's a really interesting idea. What if I looked at all video games through this lens of what would the objects be that represent them? And from there, I kind of developed an idea for my next film, which is called Game Over. which I'm going to show to you now. So here, for instance, is the Frogger screenshot. Many of you know Frogger. The turtles that run through the water at the top. You can see them there. We'll get a closer look. What does this look like? It's got a little head. It's got a little head, 2 arms. And Frogger was actually based on time, so it made sense to me that we used little clocks in there, animated, to bring Frogger to life on a time-based notion. So let me show you game over. Thank you. Okay, so then it comes up, I work with objects so much and you move them little increments at a time. What happens if you apply this same process to people? So I'm going to show you an example of what happens when you do that. Thanks. So a lot of people are curious about how we actually got this guy to be suspended in midair. And basically, we hung him by his balls in 100-degree heat in Los Angeles. And I moved him like a puppet. Working with people like this, you string them up and they just stay there for a while you position them. Brought a couple of cowboys in to move that thing. And we kept moving these guys hundreds and hundreds of times until, we achieved the effect of the film. You can see me here positioning the actors just almost like giant dolls, really, positioning their feet exactly where I want them. But most of the time, we just let this guy hang in the background for a couple hours while we worked on the film. He was strapped in this rock outfit and just hanging there in 100-degree weather. Yeah, but we had a good time. Now, the human skateboard, for instance, we had to protect him because we couldn't have someone stand on him for, 4 days straight shooting. So you can see these little foot pads that we built right there to protect protect his back, his spinal cord, while he was being stood on. You could see this is what it takes to do one shot.
Halfway down, man.
So a lot of people think it's very exciting to be on a set like this, but this is what you do hundreds and hundreds of times over and over. So in this particular case, we really did beat this guy up. He had a high threshold for pain. He had tattoos all over his body. So in casting, I knew that he could, take a beating. You can see this is really being stood on here. His hair is being pulled, just in order to kind of pull off these effects that I wanted. How did we achieve this shot? This G-force effect that I like to call? Well, actually the answer was simple. I brought in the giant leaf blower.
Here we go. Ready? Yeah.
And we tortured this guy over and over and over again, probably 30 or 40 shots. What you don't see here is that it was actually 30 degrees this day in Los Angeles. The temperature was fluctuating so wildly, 100 degrees one day and 30 degrees the next. So he's laying on the concrete at 8 a.m. getting his face blown off by a leaf blower. So that's what we do. I'm going to keep going through it until I get to the end here. Moving on to my next film. I come from an Italian family. My mother's a great cook. She always had one thing that she said about pasta is you shouldn't overcook it. Good pasta should be firm and never rubbery, is what she said. And I thought that was an interesting idea because the last time I looked at rubber bands, they looked just like pasta. So there was birthed the idea for a new film. If rubber bands were cooked spaghetti, what would uncooked spaghetti be? This is the kind of logic that I go through. So I came up with Pixie Sticks, an old children's game. So this was really the central idea around which I built my next film, Western Spaghetti, which some of you may have seen. You could raise the volume. That's it. Thank you. So here you can see me working with bubble wrap. As it turns out, bubble wrap no one ever knew there would be a use for a single bubble of bubble wrap, but that's the kind of weird things that I end up doing making films like this. It turns out to be such a good look-alike for boiling water, plus it brings that association of actually bubbling or boiling, so it seemed to be a perfect fit. You can see how it works. Occasionally I encounter an object like garlic, which didn't really have a look-alike. So it forces you to think differently about how can I represent garlic. It doesn't have to look like garlic. So I remembered when I was a kid, I used to take apart the Rubik's Cube like a lot of cheaters did in the 1980s. We used to, snap that top cube off and, show our parents and be like, look, Mom, what I did in 2 minutes. And so that's how I came up with that idea. And ultimately make the connection for a viewer, not by what it looks like, but how it acts. Maybe this is a good time to announce that I am in production on a new short film, which is actually not this one. It is a sequel to Western Spaghetti, and the big announcement here is that it is going to be Mexican-themed. So in about 2 months, you'll see that online. Yeah, big coincidence. Just started shooting it. Okay, well, thank you so much for being such a great audience, and I want to leave you with my last film, which is a little bit more of a mysterious take on the world. We kind of wonder what is down there at the bottom of the ocean. Obviously, there's a lot of junk, but this is what I thought it could be coming to life. Thank you so much.